y'all doing?
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux, coming to you from Capitol Hill, where we are in the third day of Democracy Spring. Democracy Spring is a movement that has really grown. I've noticed that we've seen more and more different people coming in and out of here, and their message is quite simple: is that they want to get money out of politics, and they want to address laws that are keeping some voters out of the ballot box and unable to vote, citizens of the United States. I'm joined now by Beverly Smith. Beverly, nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So Beverly, you're a Washingtonian, 5 generations as we discussed, and you're here protesting voter suppression and getting money out of politics. Let's just talk about how voting laws affect the African American community.
In my opinion, I feel once someone have committed a crime and has been incarcerated, it takes away their rights once they have served the time for the crime that they committed. Once they come out, they cannot fight for the rights that they believe in through voting.
Yes, and today's real theme is about racial justice. You have a nonprofit organization, Mama's Safe Haven, here in Washington. Can you talk a little bit about how you are fighting that fight to get more racial justice in society?
Well, Mama's Safe Haven is a nonprofit organization. We promote self-love, higher education, and self-employment through several programs. One of the main things that we do focus on is equality, to give our youth an opportunity to express themselves through talent shows and to let them know that their voice matters. The things that they care about are important. A lot of the children are youth, their parents have been incarcerated, who don't have that right to vote. So we empower them to stand for something or they'll fall for anything and to believe in themselves.
And when you say their parents have been incarcerated, so they no longer have the right to vote.
Yes.
And my immediate thought is, if you don't have the right to vote, why would a politician want to listen to you?
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason why we are here today, to fight for that, and the reason why Mama Safe Haven exists, because it's so important for our youth to believe in themselves, and to really speak up about the issues that we have in our community, and to start something.
And when we were discussing racial justice, we cannot not talk about economic justice and the intersection of race and class in this country. We discussed earlier the importance of jobs and employment.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. One of the things with Mama Safe Haven is we believe in self-employment. It's so important for us, again, to create for ourselves, to start their own business. Through Mama Safe Haven, we have Black Wall Street. We have a program called Welfare to Self-Employment. They have a program in the government called Welfare to Work, which is good to get a job, but we are encouraging our youth to start their own business, to create for themselves.
And these jobs that the welfare to work, for example, are they providing good paying jobs with living wage?
No. And that's the thing, the moment that you do receive employment through that program, all of your benefits are cut. A lot of those employments are through McDonald's, it could be CVS, where it's minimum wage. They're paying not enough money for them to take care of their children, not enough money to pay rent and bills, which pushes them out to do things and not justifying crime by any means, but it pushes people to, their back is against the wall, where it's like, what do we do? So, again, self-employment is key. Self-employment is key.
What do you say to folks that say people who are incarcerated is because they've done something wrong, and that cost is that you will lose your voting rights? You as an individual made a choice, and therefore you have to pay the consequences. What do you say to folks like that?
I think that is a direct way to keep them out of the justice system. It's a way to keep them away from the rules of the world. Voting is very important. So because you commit a crime, you do your time. That's it. You do your time for the crime. Away from your family, away from society, away from education and everything. So once you serve your time, I think that you need to be redeemed. I think that is very important, because once you come back to your children who are now grown, because the statutes of law, you get so much time for minimum crimes now, especially in the Black community. So you are taken away from your family, and I think that's punishment enough. And once they do come home, it's time for you to have your rights back, because you did your time. So with them, having the time to sit in jail and think about the things that they've done, to read books and find out about law, because a lot of it is we just don't know, is ignorance of the law. So once you have time to sit and think about the things you've done, to learn the different laws, and you come home and you want to educate your youth, your hands are really tied behind your back because your voice doesn't matter.
Okay, let's pivot and talk about the presidential election coming up in November. We still don't know who the Democratic nominee will be, but a lot of media attention has centered around how the African American community is very much strongly behind Hillary Clinton. Let me talk about where your politics stand, who you're supporting, and why.
Whew. Well, really, that's something that I am still on the fence about, to be honest. I'm still doing some research on it right now, and I'm focusing on, really creating for our own. When you talk about voting rights, right now we are supporting Trayon White for Ward 8 council member.
That's in Washington, D.C.
That's in Washington, D.C. He's running for Ward 8 council member, and just really starting at the ground level. There's so many issues that need to be addressed, and I really don't feel like any of the presidential candidates are addressing the issues, the real issues. I feel like it's a lot of smoke screens that's being put up. So
what do you mean by that? Which issues particularly?
When you think about education, when you think about women's rights, when you think about Black Lives Matter and the issues that we have in our community with financial literacy, when you think about, just the ability to create for our own, to get the loans to start our own business.
So at the end of the day, the change has to come within the community.
It has to come within the community. It's so important for us to start within the community and build out. Because, looking at past presidential candidates, we know that that's on a larger scale. That's on a much larger scale, and a lot of the times it do trickle down to the low-income community, but not in the rate that we need it to.
Okay, what would your message be to folks who might be watching this and on the fence about joining Democracy Spring?
I think that, it's so important for us to make our voice known. It's so important to go out and vote. It's so important to do the research yourself and not just sit back and go off what you hear on the news, but really, take that time to do the research and come up with a conscious decision on who you will vote for. It's so important for us to think for ourselves and create for ourselves.
All right, Beverly Smith, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay, great. Hopefully we'll catch up with you later.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we actually have the rally going on right now. Let's cut to one of the speakers so you can hear just what's being said.
Way to prison. Yesterday was a year since Freddie Gray's arrest, and so I feel that I need to uplift his name. 3 years ago, if you remember, a woman was shot in front of the Capitol in her car with her baby. That's Miriam Carey. And so I lift this up for you guys today to really think about these things, to think about you being in a city that is plagued by intercommunity violence, that is exacerbated by a mayor and some city council members who intentionally target returning citizens, target single mothers, target those who are in public housing. So all of these things are related to the amount of money that's in our politics. Because for every time you see these elections and you see how much is being spent, the District of Columbia spends more on prisons than it does on schools. And so when you think about that and you hear that I live right over here across the river in Ward 8 here in DC, where we have the highest unemployment rate for similarly situated communities in the country. DC has one of the largest wealth gaps of any city in the country. So I say that to you as DC is no longer a majority Black city, not just because it's changing, but because Black folks are being pushed out. So I want you to listen very, very carefully to the speakers that we have brought and those who have volunteered today, and take what they say, every word, and think about the ways in which you are complicit in the things that we're fighting for, and the amount of effort you personally need to take to be able to stand behind Black Lives Matter, to stand behind immigration issues, to stand behind LGBTQ issues, because you can't choose what kind of democracy to fight for. It's all of us or it's none of us.
Thank you, April. April laid out a lot of why we're here. And the most important thing about democracy is that it's about all of us or none of us. Give April another hand. So now, one of the things that is so important to any struggle is to understand the long train and the arc that is bent. And so we always have to have some voices from the past. And so what I'd like for y'all to do is give us a thundering roar for our next speaker, Doria Lander. And so she was involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and I'll let her say more about why she's here today.
Thank you, brothers. Thank you, brothers and sisters. I'm humbled to be here today. The wellspring of young people and some elderly, but I'm always glad to see that the fruits that we struggled for so long in the South and across the country are bearing fruit today. In 2016, I started going to jail in 1962 in Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. But today, you have more complicated issues. I'm looking at money out of politics, code pink right there. Sister, I want to lift you up there. But I get very distraught when we say that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act has been tampered with by the United States Supreme Court, which gave us at least the right to vote in the South and in other areas that are very hard for us to enter into because of the restrictions and harassment from officials, and for the Supreme Court to take that right away. It was something that we died, bled, and fought and struggled for many, many years. People were murdered. I've known too many people who were murdered, actually murdered for the right to vote. These kind of things kind of make me upset when I talk about them. However, we have to keep on struggling. And now when they say that corporations are people, I get really, really perplexed, because I'm in the age of 2016 and looking around and looking at mechanization, looking at the mechanics that they're making to take the jobs away from people, working people. The people will not be working at all. And what are we going to do with this, with the disposable humanity that we have? I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. Young people who are facing struggles. I'm so happy to see young people who are out there working and keeping the dreams alive of those of us who struggle, those who've gone on. Yeah, always, always, always. And people my age who are still struggling. But I must say that here in the District of Columbia, I'm very, very depressed about the situation, you know, gentrification, which has displaced all of the people that I knew for the most part. I live in Northwest, and throughout Northeast, when you're driving around, you don't see any people that you knew, that you knew, and you only see dogs and bicycles and other kinds of things that are in your way, and very rude people. I won't dwell on it, but it disturbs me. Also, a living wage. You cannot earn a living wage in this city in order to be able to live here. A living wage. Your restaurant workers, the people who have the minimum wage jobs, I know that California has voted for $15 an hour in increments. Washington, D.C. is supposed to be doing the same thing, but how are we going to exist in this country? And across the world, I'm not only talking about here, but across the world, I think at times about where I would like to travel somewhere, but and I'm rambling, I know that, but Ray Charles said the world is in an uproar and danger zone is everywhere. So there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the people who are in charge, the one percenters. We can't get away from the one percenters. They are dominating. And when you see people like Paul Ryan, who was obstructed briefly yesterday, and the mainstream news refuses to acknowledge your presence here in this District of Columbia, the nation's capital, we know that we're in trouble. We know that we're doing what's right. So I want to say that all of the people who have struggled, who've gone on, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, and many others that I work with going on, but we're carrying on the work in their stead. And for people like Code Pink, I see them everywhere. Everywhere. I love it. Right in your face. I'm an in your face person. Mr. Ron Moulton, I spoke to him a few minutes ago. He came on WPFW, and I was happy to hear his voice. We need these voices out there. We need the voices of the people who are struggling, who are on the ground, and to carry the message forward. Thank you, my brothers and sisters, and keep on pushing.
Yes. Thank you. April.
All right, you just heard one of the speakers, but now we're joined by Kristen Kehoe. Kristen, you are not the typical activist in this sense that you weren't even part of one of these over 100 organizations that came together. First of all, how did you hear about Democracy Spring, and what compelled you to come to Washington?
Well, I first heard about Democracy Spring on Twitter, and when I checked out their website, which is democracyspring.org, I just felt I had to come out. The influence of money in politics is the single biggest factor holding back all sorts of reform right now. And it's like that keystone issue that we really need to solve before we can do anything else to improve our country, our democracy, our position within it.
All right, you have one of these bands here, and folks who are wearing the bands, they're risking arrest today. Tell us why you're willing to go to that extent, and particularly on this day when it's about racial justice.
Well, I feel that no matter your skin color, no matter where you're from, no matter what your walk of life, we should all be uniting here. And I stand on the side of the people. I believe that even if something may be unlawful, it doesn't mean it's morally incorrect, and sometimes the morally correct thing takes precedence over what's legal. And so here I am participating in civil disobedience so that the people who don't have a voice, so that the people who don't have rights, they are raised up by what we're doing. And I couldn't be more happy than to participate in this movement today for racial justice. I think that the coalitions that we're building are so important, and I think it's so important for us all to unite behind this issue so that we can encourage movement on other issues afterwards.
And one of the major issues is about getting rid of voter suppression laws. Can we talk about that specifically? What would you guys like to see change?
So what we'd like to do is see a free and equal vote for anyone who, for everybody, no matter who you want to vote for. I think it's important that your vote matters. Every single person out there who is able to. We're working on the Voting Rights Act. We're working on getting the influence of big money out of our elections so that they're not able to buy our politicians anymore. And I feel that the more movement we can get, the better on this. The more awareness we can raise, the better. There's several bills already on the table that we could push through Congress, and it's ultimately important that we also overturn Citizens United in addition to the voting rights.
And folks are saying that a big part of racial justice, too, has to be economic justice.
Absolutely.
And it can't just simply be some people even make the argument the civil rights movement was incomplete because it didn't address the issue of unemployment in the Black communities.
And lack of opportunity.
Exactly. So how are you guys looking to make that argument and push Congress to think more about these issues in a social and racial way?
Well, I think that our movement is ultimately an ethical movement. We're about making sure that all people have an equal voice, no matter where you come from. I feel like it is ultimately important that we unify on this issue so that we can help support each other as organizations, as people, as humans, in order to lift us all up all at once. Does that make sense?
I hear you. All right, Kristen Kehoe, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
DemocracySpring.org.
All right, guys, so we have the rally still going on. Let's bring you over there to one of the speakers right now.
They don't need it. They make tips. They don't need, any increase, but they are wrong. Restaurant workers are suffering. Restaurant workers are homeless. They work in the restaurant and they go sleep in the streets. The people that are cooking your food and serving your food, in most places they are homeless. They live in shelters. And do you want that? Do you want people who serve your food are hungry and they are not even clean at some points? So we all have to get together and fight this power of the other NRA and fight for one fair wage. Exactly what's happening in California. In New York, it's all fake. It's not one fair wage. It's one fair wage for some, not for all. We are excluded for most places, and we hope with your help here, pushing the mayor here in DC to put us, with the agenda here. So I'm going to introduce two people that they are in the board of ROC, Ung and Jessica, to just say a couple words. Thank you.
He's such an emotional speaker. I love it. Hi, everyone. By the way, pardon my French, but this is the most badass shit I've seen in a long time. This is awesome. It's awesome. It's inspirational. The reason I'm a restaurant worker based right here in Washington, D.C. I'm originally from California, but I moved here about 6 years ago, and I'm a tipped worker. I want to talk to you about the history and the meaning and where tipping came from and why that is relevant to the topic of today, which is the racial justice. So our research show that the tipping actually comes from olden days, old feudal times in Europe, where think about Downton Abbey in England, all these really aristocrat rich people would go and they would tip their servants and their slaves as a way of saying, I'm an elite upper class, and here's my tip, as a sign of making sure that you're in an inferior lower class. And that's where tipping really comes from. The rich Americans at the time who traveled to Europe learned this practice, came back to America, and said, hey, I know how things are done over in Europe, in the elite rich class. I'm going to do this right here in America because I'm in the elite class. And that's how tipping began. And as slavery was abolished and then the slaves moved in, they used that the same term, and people actually pushed back against it. When the restaurant industry that came out and tried to do this, they said, hey, this is a professional industry, we don't want tips. And there were in fact a huge anti-tipping movement in America in the early 1900s. However, through the power of money in politics, it was kept the way it was. And now it's 2016, it is at $2.13 an hour. Tipping, as you know, is based in slavery. I need you guys to know this. It's very important. People don't know this. And when people learn this fact, the entire paradigm changes. That's why I had to come here and talk about it today. Of course, if I didn't have an illicit ask, it wouldn't be a movement event like this. So my brother Dave over here, there's actual one fair wage campaign that's happening in DC right now. It's happening all across the country, but there's one that's happening right now in DC. In November, there's a ballot initiative. We're taking it to the people that will take the minimum wage in DC to $15 an hour, and that will actually get rid of tip minimum wage. Everybody in this city will get paid the same minimum wage like 7 states do already. We're not talking about something that's never been done before. There are 7 states And these are states like California, all along the West Coast, Alaska, Montana, Nevada. They're doing fine. Not only doing fine, they're doing excellent. They're thriving. There's no reason why a city like DC cannot do this. So, if you are a resident of DC, if you're a voter in DC, Deva, can you raise your hand real quick? Come see this guy. Sign the ballot initiative, give your signatures, so that we can put and get it voted, and let's do this. I know I'm taking up my time. Thank you. I'm going to give it to Jessica real quick to say a few words.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for my rallying speech from Ung. Ung and I work together in D.C. We're also members of the board of directors for ROC. And that's what ROC is about, is creating opportunities for restaurant workers. Things such as putting us on their board of directors where we have real power to make real change. And that's why we're here. I also want to piggyback off what our man Mamdouh said, because I don't know if you got the context here, but Windows on the World was one of the most profitable restaurants on the top of the World Trade Center. And he lost those 73 people in a little incident you might have heard about that involves that World Trade Center. And since then, the hiring practices, the blatant racism is really easy to see. You know, who got their jobs back and who did it and where they were placed. And you know, this is all about, to bring us all together, as you've already mentioned, is that the fact that 70% of workers are women. Primarily, they are people of color, they're black. Indeed, honest and frank, the farther, as you walk from the front of house to the back of house, the browner and browner people tend to get. So the very back of the kitchen, the dishwasher, is probably the brownest person there, and also the lowest paid. This is absurd, this is unjust. This is why we talk about money in politics. Here in D.C., we have been fighting to get this on the ballot. We could have gotten this on the ballot petition signed months ago, if not for money in politics. The Chamber of Commerce was willing to undo D.C. government just to try to keep us from voting on our own legislation. Why? Because 80% of people in D.C. supported the elimination of the sub-minimum tipped wage. 80% of the people were going to vote for one fair wage. And so Chamber of Commerce was ready to kick out the mayor from her job, kick out half the city council, undo a year and a half of legislation just to deny us the democratic ability to decide our own legislation. So this is why we're here. This is why ROC has come here today, because we're here supporting everything this is about. Keeping money out of politics. Making sure that each one person, a human being with a pulse and not with an EIN number, an actual human being has one vote. And we have the right to decide what we want on the ballot, because obviously, as we know, they over there and down in the Wilson building aren't really doing anything for us. How many times have tipped workers been left out? July 1st, we have another minimum wage increase from $10.50 to $11.50. Guess how much I'm going to get paid? $2.77. Still nonsense. And here we have Muriel Bowser saying that she's going to take over $15 minimum wage. Really, Mayor Bowser, and your legislation conveniently hasn't been written yet, but you don't want to address the one fair wage where now it's included? Come on now. That's why we're taking this into our own hands. That's why we need to pull this money out of politics and make real things happen. And I want to point out again, my man Dale Vaughn in the front here, raise your hands. He's the guy with the petitions to get it signed, to get it on the ballot, support the people who do this. They're getting paid $15 an hour to get the $15 per hour initiative signed. So go to my man Dale Vaughn, if you're registered here in D.C., get your signature on, talk to him. If you know someone who needs a job, hook them up. It pays $15 an hour, y'all. Take care.
Man, get it up! That's what's up! We can't do the things
All right.
human beings should be able to do for themselves. So we gotta get a living wage.
All right, so now we're joined by Nigel O'Bannon. He's actually an organizer of Democracy Spring. Nigel, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Nigel, I'm trying to understand just, I get the money in politics, and some folks who might be joining us just now, today's theme is about racial justice. Can we talk about the intersection there and how you connect the dots?
So the way we connect the dots simply is because money in politics is like an umbrella. It's the overarching issue. So no other issue can really be solved until we get rid of until money out of politics is solved. Because the politicians who are creating the laws are very much bribed by the prison industrial complex. Because these private prisons give a lot of money to politicians to be tough on crime. And when you're tough on crime, people become the actual thing that they become revenue for them. So they become more people that go into the prison system, which then boosts the revenue for the prison industrial complex. So they buy out politicians, and they get tough on crime, and then more people go in jail. So the way social justice works is that we're trying to, because we come together to make this known that Black Lives Matter and social justice matters. Well, it's another peg, it's another piece of the puzzle to really get money out of politics as well. Because once we get money out of politics, then we can tackle every other issue. And social justice is one of those many issues that we can that will be able to tackle once money out of politics is finished.
Another part of your agenda is really attacking voter suppression laws.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how voter suppression has affected African American community and disenfranchise it disproportionately?
So the way disenfranchisement has been happening is because in a lot of states, the certain parties, well, one party in particular mostly is the Republican Party mostly has been enacting laws that have either put people of color into one district where the vote kind of doesn't really matter as much because all those people are going for that same person already. So other districts are kind of don't have as many people of color votes because they all got trapped into one district, one or two few districts.
Like gerrymandering.
Yeah. So they've been gerrymandered. That's one thing. Another way voter suppression has been happening is because a lot of people of color, unfortunately, right now, don't necessarily always have the money to be able to to get IDs or to be able to get from work to go get the licenses they need to be allowed to vote. Say the voter ID laws. That's been hurting people as well too. Another way that they've been hurt is simply because once they go to prison, once they go to jail due to the prison industrial complex, they're not allowed to vote in the United States either because they lose their right to vote. So there's many ways. There's a three-pronged war going on to keep people from voting, and that's why we came out here today to really raise more of an issue, to raise awareness about that, because it's a multifaceted issue that's really going on against people of color.
Something that struck me when we first met is your T-shirt. It says "Am I next?" ?
Yeah.
Can you talk about, on a personal level, why this issue matters so much to you?
Well, this issue matters to me for many reasons, really. One is because I'm from Boston, so I'm from Cambridge, Massachusetts. The home of Harvard, the home of MIT. It's a very progressive city. So I'm in a place that's very privileged to where many times I can walk down the street and feel safe, feel like I'm not going to be harassed by cops as much growing up in Cambridge. But at the same time, I am someone of color, so I can literally relate to people who live in Mississippi, who live in Missouri, who live in Alabama, who live in Virginia, who live in Minnesota, who live in New York, who got stopped and frisked, who got killed, who got choked to death. Who are unarmed, I can literally relate to it. I can understand how that feels, and it really asks me, am I next? Am I that next person who can go? Because I'm a very friendly guy. I talk to people. I'm very social with people. I'm a nice guy, but with that, I'm not sure if I'm gonna walk down the street and I'm gonna be that. Am I gonna be harassed by a cop if I go around the neighborhood? Am I gonna have to watch my tongue? Am I gonna be brought to heel? Am I gonna be the next one who's gonna take taken out? And it's just to remind people that I don't put myself in those situations to be harassed by cops, or simply to be in a situation where my life could be on the line, but no one ever knows. And this shirt is just to kind of remind people, saying that it's talking to me today, we're friends right now, but you never know if I'm gonna be the one who's taken out too, because I am a person of color. I could be in Mississippi tomorrow. I could be in Missouri tomorrow. I don't try.
You could be in New York. You could be here in Washington.
I could be in DC. I could be anywhere, and then my life could literally be taken away because I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this shirt is just to say that.
All right, Nigel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, let's catch up with the speakers right now. Speakers ongoing right now. It's Democracy Spring, Day 3. Take a look at some of the speakers.
Skyla Poindexter. I'm sorry. Skyla Poindexter Moore from Empower DC to come and talk to us.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Skylar Pondexter Moore, and I am a DC resident, been here 39 years, my whole life, and I'm raising my family in public housing. I wanted to come here to talk to you all about something that's happening right here in DC and all over the country, but we're in DC and that's where I live, and it's displacement. Ms. Ladner, who spoke earlier, talked to you about gentrification in DC. Government is not happening for us, it's happening to us. There's no democracy here in DC. We have to actually go and shut down government meetings, we have to shut down photo ops, we have to protest, we have to do things just to get our voices heard. In public housing, Congress has systematically, consistently taken money out of public housing to the point where we are living in slum conditions. And what's even worse about it is that they blame us for it. They tell us, you folks tearing up your homes, y'all in the projects tear up. Well, if you give me a sheet of paper as a door, then what is going to happen? It's going to fall down, it's going to crumble. There's no investment in public housing. And actually, the only investment in public housing now is to tear it down, to demolish it. Our city right here, right now, Muriel Bowser put $53 million in the budget to tear down public housing and $15 million just for repairs for a one-time repair fund. One time, not even recurring. Now imagine this, you're in your home, you're in an affordable home, you're with your family, and there's no repairs done, you're living in basic crap, and then the city comes to you and say, because you live in crap, we have to move you to another piece of crap so that we can build your place back up so that rich white folks can come in and move in, and you may or may not come back. This is called displacement. When you're forced to move from your home and you don't have a say in it, that's not democracy, it's dictatorship. We're told you have to move, and some people here in DC with their families have had to move over and over and over because we've had 8 properties torn down here in DC. 8 properties, that's thousands of units of public housing that have been destroyed. And when it comes to talking about housing, just a minute ago, nobody talked about public housing. Nobody brought up public housing. Everybody thought that it had to be broken down and mixed income and deconcentrate the poverty. Well, the way that we know how to deconcentrate poverty is to give people the resources they need to come up out of poverty. So if you put a bunch of us together, on a unit, on a public housing property, it's not because we are inherently violent, it's not because we're inherently criminals. We don't have the resources we need to uplift ourselves. Congress has taken money from public housing systematically. So now what we're looking for here in DC is for our local government to step in, to say we're going to fund public housing, we're going to preserve public housing, we're going to invest in public housing, and we don't just want to demolish it, we want to invest in the people. We want to develop the people, not develop the land, not just develop these buildings. Where's the development in the people here in DC? Where is that? We don't have that. So we've been working on this and working on this, and I want to give a shout out to Ms. Ladner, who talked about gentrification, because it's real. It hurts. It hurts to see what neighborhood you came from. You can't even go back to it because somebody has moved in your place, and you're treated like a visitor. I'm not a visitor. They say, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I've been living here. I've been here my whole life. So I just really thank you all for coming out. I want you to all Google Empower DC. Empower DC is really leading the charge in stopping displacement in public housing. We need public housing. We've lost so many units, and homelessness is through the roof. And our city acts like they don't see that the more you demolish, the more homelessness has skyrocketed here in DC. And we're not going to take it anymore. And we're to the point where we're up for civil disobedience. This is what this means. Occupy Berry Farms, we're not leaving. There's a movement here in DC that says we are not leaving. So when it comes downtown, when we have to lock arms around our properties, when we have to sit in, you know, in public housing, if you get arrested, you get thrown out. Not before you even get charged, before you even get found guilty, you're thrown out just because you're charged with something. So we can't afford to get arrested because we'll lose our housing. But we need folks like you who will sit down and lock arms and say, we support. Shout out to the signs right there, Justice for Berry Farms, right here. Berry Farms is on the chopping block. It's on the chopping block. We need our homes. We're not just those people in the projects. We're human beings. We're families. We're people. And we need our homes. So thank you. Google Empower DC, join Empower DC, and tell Congress to fund public housing. Thank you.
Let's give my sister Skylar a round of applause. Thank you, Skylar. So I'm going to keep this program moving right along. For our next speakers, we're going to ask that we limit our time to 3 to 5 minutes. We have Stuart here. Stuart, And Stuart will remind us when we have a 30-second warning. Because we have a message to deliver today, don't we? Yeah. We want money out of politics, right? Yeah. And we want racial justice now, right? Yeah. All right. So now we're going to bring up Christina Jimenez, United We Dream. We have Gracia here. I do apologize.
It's fine. Hi, everyone. How you doing? You ready? My name is Gracia Martinez. I serve the movement with United We Dream, which is the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country. I'm here to say that I am undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic. And at the core of my existence in the work, there is one truth that I know that we all share, is that Black lives matter. And so as immigrant youth, it was important for us today to show up in solidarity with our brothers and sisters that are undocumented Black, with our folks that are being killed in the streets, and the way that money and politics has also led to the lives of people being taken away. It has led to people being put into deportation proceedings and people making money off of the backs of Black and brown bodies. And so for us, at the core of today, it's making sure that we are standing in solidarity, but the other piece is that we are making a commitment to each other to combat anti-Blackness in every space that we occupy, to combat anti-Blackness in the messaging that we have for today's action, in the messaging that the media will push on us. And so that is, if you're ready to do that, raise your hand. Can I hear you? So in honor of all of the work that folks have been leading, let's do a quick chant. So when I say no justice, no peace, no racist police. Ready? No justice, no peace. No racist, no peace. No justice, no peace. No racist, no peace. What do we want? Justice. What do we want it? Now. What do we want? Justice. What do we want it? Now. Go and get it. Black Lives Matter. Thank you so much.
All right. So now we're going to bring up to the stage Mr. Ron Moten, the Other Side Media. Give it up for Ron. Okay.
Mic check, where's Ron?
Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Brother Ron. Are you here with us? Okay, so we're going to keep it moving. Now let's call up Anise Jenkins. Stand up for democracy in DC. Free DC. Woo!
Free DC. What do we want? Statehood. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Statehood. When do we want it? Now. What do you want? Statehood. When do we want it? Now. My name is Anise Jenkins, as you heard, Executive Director of Stand Up for Democracy in DC, otherwise known as Free DC. Welcome to the nation's capital. You are standing on the last plantation. DC residents are the U.S. is the only country in the world where the residents of its capital cannot vote in its Congress. Right across here, you're looking at the building that excludes over 700,000 people who pay the highest federal taxes per person in the country. We are not allowed to vote in the Senate. We are not allowed to have voting representation in the House. We are not allowed to control our own local budget, which money comes out of our own pocket. We're not getting any dole from the United States government. In fact, The people in the Congress, they use our fire department, they use our roads, they use every facility that we have, they use our water, and yet we had the federal payment of $500 million stripped in 1995 and haven't got it back since. We say that's wrong. That's wrong. That is wrong. We couldn't even vote for president until the 23rd Amendment in 1965. Now you know that is wrong. I want to tell you something else. We had Ted Cruz not long ago. Boo. All right. He said he preferred for us to spend our local money on charter schools instead of public schools. That sounds like he doesn't know anything about Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. We voted for marijuana. Okay, we did, 80% of us, so that we could keep and stop the arrest of young black people who were having very small amounts and doing nothing with it but smoking it themselves and not selling it, getting put into the incarceration and criminal justice system for nothing. We had Andy Harris of Maryland. Who did we vote? We didn't vote for Andy Harris. We had Andy Harris of Maryland threatening to lock up our mayor because he didn't like it. He said, you can't enforce that law. I don't care if people of DC voted for it. Forget you. I'm going to put you in jail. All right. What we need for you to do, and I want to say one more thing. It's wonderful that Democracy Spring is here. It's beautiful. We love you. And you don't know, April 16th, 1862 is very significant this Saturday. April 16th, 1862, 3,185 enslaved people that used to be marched up and down in chains past the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue were released. So now you're here to honor those ancestors. You're going to get your power from those ancestors. We want you on Friday to meet us at Freedom Plaza. Come on out and meet us. We're going to march for a taxation without representation. Meet us at 9:30 a.m. We need all your bodies to come. All of you to help march up to the Capitol and say, we support a free DC. What do you want? When do you want it? Now. What do you want? When do you want it? Now. Thank you, Democracy Spring.
What do you want? Statehood or free DC? Statehood, all right. What do we want? Statehood. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Statehood. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Statehood. When do we want it? Now. If we don't get it, shut it down. 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 All right. Again, I want to be able to uplift Sister Anise. Thank you so much. And before her, we had Sister Gracia Martinez. Thank you so much. Give her a round of applause. All right. Each and every one of these issues are important, particularly to black and brown communities. And just to keep the program moving along, now I am going to invite Sister Esther. Oh, okay. Ron is with us, Brother Ron. We were calling you earlier. Say welcome, Brother Ron. Welcome, Brother Ron.
Thank you, my sister. First of all, we know that we don't have any justice in America anytime a statue like that's still here. We know anytime a statue and a holiday that honors Christopher Columbus still exists, we got some problems here, right? Am I right? Am I right? I want to start off with talking about DC a little bit. In the nation's capital, where 91% of our 15 to 17-year-olds are living in families where a mother normally is raising them by themselves is a direct result of the criminal justice system that has taken fathers away and locked them up at alarming rates for nonviolent crimes. But I'm going to take it a little further. In D.C., we don't have a prison for our prisoners, right? So they ship them all around the country where their families can't see them, and they separate us from our children, right? And then they enslaved them, working for slave wages, right? In Unicorn, right? And then they come back home and they can't get a job for the things they learned how to do while they were in prison, right? So we have to stand up and say enough is a what? Enough is a what? Enough is a what? We are tired of seeing black and brown brothers and sisters, especially our sisters now, where in D.C. 30% of the lockups of teenagers are young black women being incarcerated. And we know that's a direct result of them not having a mother and father in a household that came from laws that were imposed by Hillary Clinton and her husband Bill Clinton. And they walk around talking about they love black people. You not my first black president, and you not my first white president. Your laws destroyed the black community. Your laws destroyed the brown community. And then on top of that, the popular vote means nothing in this country. When the people vote for somebody, it means nothing in this country. But we go around the world telling people what they should be doing. There's something wrong with that, am I right? Is there something wrong with that? Is there something wrong with that? How is it that the popular vote means nothing? How is it that somebody like Hillary Clinton, who everybody know that her cousin, her brother, her cousin, whatever he is, we don't know what they are. You know, one day he's with somebody else, one day he's with her, right? Am I right? So whatever they got going on, I don't know what they got going on. But whatever they got going on, we know that what they did when Bill policies took the black man out the household, policies that say if you get a record, you can't go back and live with your family. You can't go back and live with your daughter, your mother, your wife. You purposely destroyed the black family, and enough is enough. We have to change these policies. Democracy now, democracy spring, democracy forever.
Thank you so much, Brother Ron. So powerful, so powerful. Give him another round of applause. So we are standing here before you today. We're not standing before you as Democrats. We're not standing before you as Republicans. This is a nonpartisan movement. And dozens of public figures have come out to support this. Hundreds of organizations all aiming to take back our political systems, and thousands of people, and we are here to ensure that this Congress and any elected official that comes after listens to the people. Am I right? All right. So we are going to bring up Sister Esther Aviram to stage, a powerful, powerful poet.
Laquan McDonald, say his name. Sandra Bland, say her name. Eric Garner, say his name. Natasha McKenna, say her name. Freddie Gray, say his name. Miriam Carey, say her name. Trayvon Martin, say his name. Rakia Boyd, say her name. My heart is not for sale. Even here in American twilight, even in crosshairs of drones, mercenaries, soldiers, or cops, forced to choose between a home and health, these gray jackals are bold with no stealth, ripping through my scraps of light. But we intend to stand and fight, Because our hearts are not for sale. Capitol Hill is for sale. The White House is for sale. The NRC, the SEC, the Pentagon, CIA, FBI, NYPD, PPD, BPD, LAPD, military mercenaries and contractors, blood-splattered benefactors of insane war on us without end. While character actors on Capitol Hill are for sale, the White House is for sale, the BP watchers and buyers, the AAA credit score liars, the K Street accountants, lawyers, lobbyists, and Fox News hires. Not to mention police who fire on Tahrir Square, Walter Scott, and on Wall Street occupiers. We can't live without water, yet they have sold what we drink to oil drillers, gas drillers, and frackers who are killing us more than any terrorist attacker, sold our air to coal diggers, given our tax dollars and to bankers and bombers, missiles and tanks, to kill a husband, wife. For more than 2 million Iraqis dispatched to the next life. Dispatched to the next life to rise again and again, to taste that red-eye transatlantic current to the U.S. Thousands from Chile, 2 million from Cambodia, 6 million from the Congo. We want to export something other than war. We want to build something that does not kill. In our new world, peace be still. No more dollars to kill a child, husband, or wife. Bread and roses for Tamir Rice's snuffed out life. For Riakia Boyd's, no blood on my hands or heart. We won't be quiet, let's start. 2, who is the terrorist? Who is the torturer? Who is the rapist? Who is the criminal? Who is the thug? Who police kill the child? Whose drones kill with stealth? Whose bankers steal the wealth and our health while we obsess over what? Fantasy football, thigh gaps, and who has a fake butt? How many wars of roaring beasts over land? How many Congo hands cut off for rubber? How many Congo women split in two for coltan? How many wars for slaves, arms sales, gold and diamonds? Now and forever, my heart is not for sale. I want a no-fly zone over air and water, a no-fly zone over me, no slaughter, a no-fly zone over my womb and vagina, a no-fly zone over homes, schools, and health, a no-fly zone, not just for the 1%, redistribute the wealth. Listen, you planet vampires, you fake masters of the universe. Nobody's walking into your Fourth Reich, and our hearts are not for sale. We will export something other than war. We will build something here that does not kill. In our new world, peace be still. No more dollars to kill a child, husband, or wife. Bread and roses for Freddie Gray's snuffed out life. No blood on our hands or heart. We won't be quiet. Let's start.
Before we head to the Capitol, let's take a couple of minutes and allow Sister Esther Words to just kind of resonate with us. Let's remember those black lives that we have lost, those black bodies that we have lost, our black brothers and sisters that we have lost, our black children that we have lost. Thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause. So we're going to head to the Capitol because we have a message to deliver, right? And what is that message? That's right. We want the money out of politics, right? We want one voice. Okay, I'm not convinced. I'm sorry, people. It's time to go home. One voice. One voice. One vote. One voice. One vote. One voice. One voice. One voice. One voice. That's what I'm talking about. We are definitely here today to take back our political system and to ensure that big money interests are out of our political system and that we put an end to voter suppression. Right? All right. So we've covered a lot of topics here today. And I think to say anything more, I would just be preaching to the choir, as they say, right? But we need to go and take our voices where it matters, right? Am I right? We're going to take our voices up here to the Capitol. And I'm going to bring Tanya up here real quick so she can explain the process to us so we can go peacefully and in solidarity. Thank you.
All right. So when we start marching over, like I said, we're going to have the marshals. We all have yellow bands on our arms, foreheads, wherever we put them, look for the yellow. That's who we are. We're going to be on the perimeter. We're going to keep you guys safe and keep all of us unified and organized. We're going to stay marching all the way.
Okay, this is Jessica Devereaux coming to you from Capitol Hill. We are in day 3 of Democracy Spring. I'm joined now by Ron Moulton. You heard him on stage speaking a bit earlier. Ron, I think what we haven't been able to get in our coverage just yet, and something that you mentioned while you were on stage, so talk about how laws this is by design in terms of disenfranchising Black community, Black families in particular. Can you speak to how the influence of money has made its way to affecting Black communities?
Well, there are several policies that have affected our communities. You know, when Clinton was in office, of course, with this devastating crime bill that took parents out the household, fathers out the household, killed Black wealth when they sentenced us to prison for nonviolent crimes for decades in many cases. I still have friends that are locked up since 1991.
What did the crime bill do exactly?
So basically what it did, it put large numbers of people in prison, which destroyed communities, right? Which destroyed wealth. So if you have a community that was thriving, or a community where you have mothers and fathers in the household, now you have 91% of these same communities where they have been raised by single-parent households. That destroys the community. That destroys everything, all the fabric. We don't have a village anymore.
So basically, the war on drugs, this is what we're talking about,
Right.
and sentencing and policies of that nature.
Right.
So can you speak to that a bit more?
Yeah, so the war on drugs, the sentencing, destroy our families. The law where if I commit crime, I can't come back and live with my wife. I can't live with my children if they get any assistance from the government. That has destroyed and it's separated, actually put man and woman against each other in many cases, right? From your traditional family. So it's destroyed our family and it's been catastrophic. We haven't been able to recover from that, and it's been over 20 years. So, and then on top of that, you send these guys to prison. A lot of times they learn good trades working in Unicorn, where they making $1 or so an hour, right? They're getting rich, but then they come home and they can't get a job doing what they were doing in prison.
Because of the box that they have to check if you've committed a felony.
Right. If you commit a crime, now you can't get a job, but you can get a job in prison. And so what we have is hurt people. So these people come home already hurt and wounded for being incarcerated for long periods of time for nonviolent crimes. And then they come home and doors are shut in their face. You see what I'm saying? So now we have a rise of crime in urban America. We have a lot of anxiety, despair, hopelessness. And this is what you see now. Everybody's coming together to say we must address it.
Okay. I've noticed that this movement is very intergenerational, but truth be told, I don't see a lot of Black people here. I mean, considering the amount of people here. Why is it, do you think, that it's often difficult to, or maybe it's not, why hasn't there aren't more people from the Black community represented in something like this?
I think organizers have to do a better job of getting us in on the front end. We found out about this in the end, and I'm happy that we're here. But we just have to, and some things in our community we must do better as well. So I just think it's more, communication is more so the issue there. So that's it.
So communications between groups with similar missions.
Right, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we had to have more collaborative efforts working together, and we had to communicate a little better, but, you know, it's good. Okay. And the other thing is, the crazy thing is, you don't have to agree on everything. I'm a Republican, and I'm here.
You're a Republican. Yeah. Interesting enough. So who are you supporting?
If I wouldn't support none of them. I would support Kasich, but not.
Okay, so for someone who's a Republican, but you sound to be like a progressive in terms of your policies.
Well, no, there's a lot of people who feel the same way I feel. I don't know too many people in my circle who think that the crime bill helped Blacks at all. I don't know. They couldn't walk around me saying it did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what in particular, because I think this is interesting.
So I did a lot of work with Jack Kemp's son. So if you know anything about Kemp was somebody who had the enterprise zones to help business around the impoverished communities. He had communities where black people owned their communities. Bill Clinton came in and gutted that law out, where we were owning our properties in public housing. He gutted that out, and that's why we're being displaced all over the country. Most people don't know that. So it's certain policies like that I embrace. I believe that you have to empower people and hold them accountable at the same time. And those policies are the ones that work.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ron.
All right.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Okay, so go right ahead. So this is live TV. So we are going to continue our coverage of the march. There are going to be people risking arrest, as there were yesterday and the day before. If you're just tuning in, this is Democracy Spring on Capitol Hill. Democracy Spring, the main message is to get money out of politics and also to push back on voter suppression laws. Those are the two main themes. And today's big issue and the issue that is surrounding today's energy is all about racial justice. We interviewed several folks talking about why they're here, the importance of racial justice, how this all intersects, money and politics, as well as racial justice. So we're going to continue this coverage. Stick with us. We're just going to take a break, but we'll be back. I'm Jessica Devereaux reporting on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, come on.
So let's begin with your work on campaign finance, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what you're doing, but also if you could explicate what you have targeted as the mechanisms or the levers of change by which, you know, this reform might be made possible.
Yeah, I think there are three moving parts. And one is the president, the second is Congress, and the third is a part of the Constitution people like to ignore, which is the convention clause in the amending provision. And the work that I'm doing right now with this thing called the Mayday PAC, where Mayday comes from the distress call, Mayday, a Mayday on this democracy, is to build really a super PAC that will engage in the election cycle of 2014 and in 2016 with the ultimate objective of getting a Congress in 2016 committed to fundamental reform. And this project we began by basically hiring a firm a couple years ago to make a calculation. What would it cost to win a Congress committed to fundamental reform? And the most important insight they had was that we had to run a campaign in 2014 that basically terrified Congress by winning in at least 5 seats on this issue in a way that made it clear that if you raised this issue before the American people, they would act on it. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. And we did this Kickstarter campaign to raise $1 million in 30 days, and we crossed that line in 13 days.
Wow.
And now we're in a second campaign, a much more, maybe too much more ambitious campaign of raising $5 million in 30 days. And with that and some matches, we'll have the funds necessary to hire the firms to run these campaigns.
So how would you envision allocating, using this money, deploying this money?
So this is a super PAC. It's an evil super PAC, right? And we're sort of embracing the irony of using a super PAC for the purpose, ultimately, of ending all super PACs. So as a super PAC, we have to act independently of campaigns. So basically, we're going to hire campaign shops, ideally on the in the Democratic side and on the Republican side, that will get into races and run campaigns, run a ground operation if that made sense, basically do whatever makes sense to win. Now, we're eager to begin to push the development of new technologies that bring new people into politics. That's going to be an essential part of winning here. But in the short term, for 2014, the objective is to win. And if we can win in a dramatic way in at least 5 of these seats, then I think we set ourselves up for a much bigger impact in 2016.
And when you say win, that would be supporting candidates who promise, once they get to Congress, to institute public financing of campaigns?
Who have committed to co-sponsor what we call fundamental reform, but all of the things we've pointed to are basically different versions of small dollar public funded campaigns. It's critical, of course, to build the base in the Democratic Party, but even more importantly, we've got to find a way to get Republicans on this side of the fight, because this kind of reform is so fundamental that it cannot happen if it's partisan. If it's partisan, it will be certain to be defeated.
Given that relatively small amount of money that you have compared with the kinds of super PACs that the Koch brothers and others can fund, don't you worry that you know, I mean, the last election cycle was $2.5 billion, that in terms of the percentage of money spent, it's relatively insignificant?
Yeah, so in 2014, we're in 5 races. We hope to have about $2 million in each race. That's a pretty significant amount of money in those races.
Which races?
We haven't announced them yet. We haven't determined them finally yet. It'll be a function of where the numbers sit.
Are these Senate or House?
House. Mainly House. We're toying with the idea. There are 2 very interesting Senate races. South Dakota, Larry Pressler, who was a Republican but now is running as an independent, and he's famous, of course, because he was the one member of Congress who blew the whistle on the ab scam scandal. So he's a very interesting candidate to think about supporting. And in New Hampshire, there's a really wonderful Republican who openly embraces public funding, who's running against Scott Brown, and that might be another interesting race to get into at the Senate level. But the main races we've been looking at are at the House level, and so that's a significant amount of money in a House race. And I think what we've seen, for example, in the Eric Cantor surprise, is that if the message is right and it resonates with people in a way that I think this message does, it's not actually going to take a lot of money to begin to line up people on the right side of this issue.
How do you handle candidates like Barack Obama, who did talk about public financing in 2008, along with many other issues, including closing Guantanamo and revisiting NAFTA, et cetera, rolling back the egregious violations of civil liberties under Bush. And then once he got into office, these turned out to be, essentially lies, public relations gimmicks in order to win an election. But he had no intention, we know, because he immediately brought in Larry Summers and others. How do you deal with the fact that so often in an election cycle, because of the polling, because they take the pulse of the American public, because they're very good at feeding back to us what they know we want to hear, that as soon as they get into Congress, they do the bidding of corporate lobbyists.
Yeah, maybe that's what would happen. But I don't see the alternative to electing people who have committed to a pretty simple task. I mean, simple in the sense it's clear whether they do it or not. I'm not talking about people committing to voting for something. They're committing to co-sponsoring something. So that's about sending a letter on the first day to the sponsor of a bill and say, please join me to your bill. And if we can build a majority in the House and a supermajority in the Senate who've committed to this kind of reform, then I think we have a real shot of pushing it. Now, obviously, 5 races in 2014 isn't going to create the political movement to do it. But we believe that if we can demonstrate why this issue is so salient, and we can show how we've moved the dial in an election, then when we get to 2016, there'll be a lot of people, both small dollar contributors and big dollar contributors, who are interested in trying to support the effort to finally get this change through a Congress. Because I think what both sides are increasingly recognizing is that the way we fund elections can't help but corrupt their own side against what they want. I mean, you know, we on the left see that in 1,000 contexts. But what's interesting, in particular, again, about the Eric Cantor fight is that the thing that was so powerful in what Bratt was saying against Eric Cantor is that he'd become a crony capitalist. He'd be, you know, given in to the crony capitalists. Now, you know, I don't like Eric Cantor's politics, but the idea that Eric Cantor becomes a crony capitalist has got to be the clearest testimony to the fact that money is an impossible force to resist inside of the current system. And if both sides begin to say, look, we just can't get what we want so long as this is the lever of control inside the system, we might begin to build the kind of cross-partisan support this will take.
Let's look at the debate over the public option, because we had significant numbers in the House. I believe around 60. The Black Caucus supported it. We had Bernie Sanders support it. Dennis Kucinich, when he was in the House, was very outspoken in support of it. And yet, through the caucus hearings, they managed to utterly silence what would have been a rational discussion of health care by bringing up the public option. And the corporate state used very heavy-handed tactics to turn all of these people who had co-sponsored this legislation, who had, I don't know if they got it out of committee, but who had supported the public option, so that even Bernie Sanders and finally Dennis Kucinich supported Obamacare and didn't fight for it. How do you envision confronting that monolith?
Yeah, I mean, the public option is a perfect example of the way in which the threat of money is enough to stop a party from pushing for something. Because they basically said, you know, we're going to defeat the Democratic majority if you don't give us relief on the public option. I think the difference with that, though, and the issue that we're pushing here is that though it's perfectly clear that if we change the way you fund elections, it would radically weaken the power of lobbyists and these types of interests inside of Washington, it's a hard thing to rally those interests against, right? You know, for example, think about the climate change debate, which, you know, I'm as committed to the idea of the need for climate change legislation as anybody. But I also believe there's actually 2 sides to the debate, not the science debate. There's not 2 sides to that debate. But as you go into a district, one side can stand up and say, yeah, I get the climate problem, but we have jobs. We need there are people who need jobs. And you start doing this, you'll destroy the economy. And that creates 2 sides to the debate, whether there should be or not. That produces it. But on this issue, it's hard to imagine what the other side of the debate says. Like, you know, it's important the Koch brothers or the Soros, George Soros has this extraordinary influence in our political system. I mean, what do people say? Now, we know that sometimes people think something turns out to be completely idiotic, but they think, you know, it's a good thing that the rich people have all this power because they're the smart people. You know, that's totally ridiculous in its way in which it plays out. But anyway, they think that, but you can't say that. You can't run ads that sort of that say that in any direct way. So I actually think it's not that it's an impossible thing to fight, but it's a fight which is strongly on this side. So So yeah, there's going to be an enormous battle necessary to ultimately win this, because when K Street recognizes that 40% of the value of K Street is going to disappear if this type of reform gets passed, they're going to fight it like hell, which is why we've got to find a way to build the biggest army possible of people saying, finally, let's get this done so we can get back to what ordinary politics is supposed to be. You get your gang and I get my gang, and we figure out who gets the most votes.
Well, they'll fight it the way they always fight it, which is to lie. They'll swift vote you. I mean, they will miss, as they did with the public option.
Yeah.
Death panels, you can't choose your own doctor, and they have such a huge megaphone that they can create false perceptions. That's what they're quite skillful at.
Yeah, they will do all that. But I don't think we have the option to just sit back and say, okay, so therefore let's not try it. We got to try it. We got to step up and do whatever the hell we can, because the consequences of not fixing this problem are too great. There isn't a single problem you and I care about, or a single problem that people on the right care about, that can be addressed sensibly so long as we have the system. So, you know, we might lose. You know, it might be likely that we're going to lose, but that's no excuse for not doing absolutely everything we can to try.
How do you handle the courts, which have, especially at the Supreme Court, become wholly owned subsidiaries of corporate power?
Actually, the kinds of reform that we're pushing are totally fine, even with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been, you know, activist in striking down reforms that try to silence people. And they have this ridiculous decision where a public funding statute basically put more money into a race if private money was being spent on the other side. And the court struck that down, which was, you know, just a ridiculous interpretation of the First Amendment. But even that court has consistently affirmed the idea that you can create basically public funding schemes. And this public funding scheme is the least problematic, because rather than, you know, the model of, for example, presidential public funding, where the government decides how much money people get to run their campaigns, this is give every voter the power to facilitate public funding by either matching their small dollar contributions or giving them a voucher they can use to support small dollar candidates. Those are completely constitutional, even with the Supreme Court. Now, they could make up a whole new, you know, theory, but I actually don't think that's what they would do. I think that as long as it were voluntary, at least in the way it was structured, they would uphold this.
And how would public financing look to you of campaigns?
So in my ideal vision of public financing, you basically give every voter a voucher, and you say candidates can take those vouchers if they agree to take only those vouchers, plus maybe small contributions of up to $100. So in my book, I described a $50 voucher. You know, and $50 per voter is $7 billion, which is about 3 times the amount raised and spent in the last congressional election. So it's real money, but the critical thing is it's real money that's spread out across all the voters. Because in my view, the central problem to the current system is that we have outsourced the funding of campaigns to the tiniest fraction of the 1%. You know, it's basically 150,000 Americans who are the relevant funders of campaigns.
Right.
It's the same number of people as are named Lester in the United States. So the Lesters basically are the funders of campaigns. But funding the campaign is an essential step on the way to getting elected, right? So we've created this 2-stage election where this tiny, tiny fraction determines the first stage, which then gets you to the second stage. So, you know, unlike the, you know, very much like the white primary in the Old South, we've created a green primary in the new America. But the difference between the white primary is in the white primary, at least the majority got to vote. In the green primary, it's the tiniest, tiniest fraction of the 1% that get to vote. So the only way to address that problem, in my view, is to find a way to spread out the funder influence. So it's no longer the tiniest fraction of the 1%. It's the vast majority, or, you know, maybe it's 20% or 40% that are the relevant funders of campaigns. And the way to do that is to facilitate this kind of funding that a wider range of Americans participate in.
And one would assume that eventually the goal is to abolish super PACs altogether.
Yeah, and by super PACs, you know, I mean that very precisely. I don't have any problem with independent political action committees so long as contributions to them are limited, right? So, you know, if AARP or Planned Parenthood or the ACLU or the NRA wants to get their members to support an independent political action committee, that's democracy in my view. The corrupting dynamic that's been produced now, though, is that because they can take unlimited contributions, they've become the kind of laundering device for candidates who, for rich people, and also now corporations who want to participate in the political process. Because, you know, the thing that most of us, at least I certainly missed after Citizens United, was that, you know, Citizens United just created or according to the court, affirmed the right of corporations and unions to spend whatever they want in political elections. But it turned out corporations, like rich people after Buckley, were pretty shy. You know, there was a high cost to free speech, as Target found when it supported an anti-gay candidate for governor in Minnesota. So they don't actually use the right to spend their own money. It was only after the DC Circuit created the super PAC by saying that limits on independent political action committees also had to be abolished, that they began to give their money to the Independent Political Action Committee, so that the Independent Political Action Committee becomes, the super PAC becomes the device that engages in political action. And because of the really outrageous transparency rules which the FEC has imposed here, corporations can now give their money to a C4, this nonprofit entity, and the C4 can give its money to the super PAC, and you have no idea who's actually giving the money to the super PAC. So dark money has risen dramatically in 2012. It'll be much higher in 2014. And that's because of the structure of the super PAC. So yes, eliminate super PACs in the sense of entities that can take unlimited contributions, but there's no problem with independent political action committees or any entity that can take small contributions as a way to facilitate democratic organization.
How much emphasis in terms of change, in terms of wresting back power from corporate hands, do you place, or how much energy would you like people to place in campaigns like this and the electoral process? And how much energy should be placed in building mass movements that obstruct the mechanisms of corporate power, like Occupy Wall Street?
Yeah, so my view is, you know, we have to learn to walk, chew gum, and tweet at the same time. All these things have to be happening together. And just like the civil rights movement wasn't just Dr. King, it wasn't just the techniques of Gandhi, so too this movement is going to win only if it can attract a wide range of support. Now, in my view, we will only pass fundamental reform through the political system if it can appeal, if it can be heard by the wide range of participants in the political system. If it's heard as something that denies the fundamental views of 40% of the American people, then it's guaranteed to lose. You know, because, just to be very practical about it, if it takes constitutional change to bring about some of these reforms, like, for example, it's possible, I don't actually think it will be necessary, but it's possible that to eliminate the super PAC will require constitutional amendments. You know, the Constitution says 3/4 of the states, 38 states, have to ratify any amendment.
Can you explain why that is? Why that is? Because aren't the super PACs authorized through the judiciary?
Well, right, but if the Supreme Court upholds, you know, the Supreme Court didn't create super PACs, it was the DC Circuit. But if the Supreme Court says eventually that yes, limits on independent political action committees are unconstitutional, the only way to address that is to change the Constitution.
I see, right, I see.
So to amend the Constitution requires 38 states. We live in a country where there are 27 double red states, states controlled by, both houses are controlled by the Republican Party. So there's no, you know, I don't think there's any way to imagine an amendment to the Constitution that the Republican Party identifies as anti-Republican, right? Which, if you make this a movement about how some of the more extreme versions of what the progressive movement wants to talk about, it's a sure way to guarantee it can't pass. But if you can begin to talk about this the way it's developed in, for example, Montana, where after the Supreme Court of Montana tried to evade Citizens United, and the Supreme Court of the United States slapped them down unceremoniously without even allowing a hearing. They just sort of reversed the opinion of the Montana Supreme Court without any actual opportunity for it to be defended. In Montana, there's developed a very powerful cross-partisan, both Republicans and Democrats, movement supporting this kind of reform. And Montana's legislature has passed a resolution supported by Democrats and Republicans alike, calling on Congress to pass an amendment to reverse Citizens United. So they've found a way to talk about it in Montana that doesn't alienate Republicans or Democrats. And I think my view is I want to work on the strategy that tries to find a way to move this fundamental reform without guaranteeing its ultimate defection.
Does this discriminate against third parties? Because obviously you could have the Green Party supporting this in a three-way race. But you know from the polling that the chances of the Green Party taking a House or Senate seat are almost nil. So what do? Do you support two candidates? Do you support every candidate? How do you handle that?
Yes, look, the American political system that forces people into these two parties is deeply problematic, and we've got to change that. And I think there are 15 things we got to think about changing: the Electoral College, the gerrymandering. But in my view, the question is, what is the change that we need to do first? What's the sequence of reform? So yeah, we will participate in this unjust two-party system to make it possible for us to bring about a more just way of funding elections. And I think that brings us to a place where we can think about the other reforms that will be really essential in order to get us to a democracy we can be proud of. But certainly in 2014, it's possible we would support Larry Pressler, who's an independent political candidate in South Dakota. That would be non-two-party system.
And with that, when you say support, does that mean then in essence running television advertisements on his behalf? Basically?
Yeah. As acting as an independent political action committee, coming in and showing why what he has done historically has been importantly tied to anti-corruption work. He supports the idea of funding elections in a better way. I interviewed him for my book, and he had this wonderful line where he says, the most striking thing about the Obama care decision were the issues that were never even mentioned, the ideas that were never mentioned. He said, when I was in the Senate, even Republicans talked about the single payer. Single payer was an obvious solution to this problem. But notice how it was not even allowed to be talked about. And that's because, Larry Pressler said, the lobbyists had made it clear, you even raise this as an issue, we will destroy you.
Right. And when it was talked about, it was mischaracterized in an effort to demonize it.
Yes, absolutely.
And given the weight of forces you're up against, if this has any traction, you can expect exactly the same. Yes. So any victory in 2014 is Pyrrhic in the sense that you send, if you focus on 5 races, in people who are willing to co-sponsor a bill, but of course the vast majority of the elected officials in the House and the Senate are not, and given that number, it may never leave. It may never leave committee. I mean, that may be the best that you can hope for.
Well, the objective in 2014 is to convince people who right now think there's no way to win this issue, that there actually is a way to win this issue. Think of it as a kind of business model. We've got investors out there, investors who would be willing to invest in bringing about a better democracy. Right now they say there's no way to achieve that. But if we in 2014 can show, look, we spent this money, we moved the dial, we do polling before and after, we moved the dial this way and the way people talked about it. We actually won in these particular races. take that same analysis and now extend it to the 50 or 60 different races you'd have to imagine being in order to get a Congress that would bring about fundamental reform. Now you've given them something they can begin to say, okay, I think there's a reason to invest in this as a strategy for bringing about fundamental reform. Now, of course, people inside of Washington will not, necessarily believe it's going to be possible. And the pundits will tell you it can't be done. But how many of them predicted Eric Cantor was going to go down? I don't care really what the insiders think about the way in which this can happen. What I care is getting real data that shows that it can happen and then recruiting the kind of resources necessary to make it possible.
What about the press? I mean, as you have begun this campaign, we have a press that is controlled by roughly a half dozen corporations, Viacom. I mean, how have you found trying to get your message out through commercial media?
In some sense, the problem with American politics is mirrored with the problem with American press. In the sense that the business model of polarization is profitable for both politics and the press. And what that means is if you're trying to move an idea which in its core should not be polarized, it's not attractive to anybody, right? The particular remedies that I'm talking about, changing the way we fund elections, are not necessarily ones that the press would be upset about. If you were talking about cutting the cost of political campaigns in half, limiting expenditures to 50% of their last year's amount, then the press would be very upset because they make so much money off of political campaigns and the ads that are spent, that are bought in political campaigns. But if you're talking about just funding it differently, what do they care? They get their money either way. So there's no economic reason why they should be against this. What there will be is a strong desire to polarize it one way or the other. I mean, both sides, neither side really cares which way it's polarized. It's just polarized, and then they get to play the opposite. And so the hardest problem for us is to figure out how to move this in a way that resists that. But again, I don't see the press as a leading indicator of where American politics is going. It's very reactive. And it's one of the striking features of American politics today that when you sit down with strategists and you talk about an idea like this and you say, where do we have to be in order to win? They don't say you've got to be on ABC News. They don't say you need to be on CNN or on Fox or on MSNBC. They say you've got to get onto Comedy Central. You've got to be on Comedy Central if you want an idea like this to have a chance at winning. Now, what does it say about America? That the place you've got to be to bring about a fundamental change in the political system is Comedy Central.
What's Hillary Clinton's position on campaign finance?
Well, I knew where she was in 2008, because Obama clearly saw this was the way to hit her. Both he and Edwards took up this issue of fundamental reform as a way to attack her. And in 2008, she was, deeply impatient with this whole argument. And, she had this gaffe where at the yearly Coast Conference, which wasn't called that then, but whatever it was called, it was that conference. She made that comment about how, lobbyists are people too, and they represent ordinary people too. And it was kind of the laughingstock, which then fueled Obama in his attack on her. But I think, the mature view of what Clinton was saying might ultimately be correct. I hope it isn't, but might ultimately be correct, which was, look, there's no way a president can take this issue up. Because this issue is an issue about attacking Congress. And if you as a president make it your campaign to attack Congress, you basically guarantee you get nothing through Congress. And if you get nothing through Congress, then the business model of the American presidency, which is to run, get reelected, and then become a kind of, nobility for the rest of your life, will fail. You will not get reelected. So no president could rationally make this the object of his or her administration, and therefore I won't either. Now, Obama, sounded to me, and he was a friend. I knew him at Chicago. We were on the faculty together. I really believed it, stupidly perhaps, but I really believed it. It sounded to me like he was going to take this issue up. But it's pretty clear once Hillary Clinton was no longer a rival, it disappeared from his rhetoric in the campaign, and he literally did not one thing to bring about, even propose a change that would affect this problem in any fundamental way. And he went back on the promise, to reinforce your point about what politicians will do, to introduce changes to public funding for the presidential election. You know, we forget this really important fact that until Obama, every president after Nixon got elected with public funding. Indeed, the person who benefited the most from public funding was Ronald Reagan, who would never have been President Reagan but for public funding. He would never have had a chance to run in 1976 had there not been a way for him to get money for his elections, because the Republican Party was not about to give money to this, quote, right-winger named Ronald Reagan. But because of public funding, he was a viable candidate in 76, he became the winning candidate in 1980, and in 1984, he attended well, it depends how you count. Let's be conservative. He attended 8 fundraisers. Barack Obama, in his re-election campaign, attended 229 fundraisers, right? So the radical difference that Barack Obama brought about by basically giving up public funding and therefore saying that's never going to be a part, is to completely change the way in which a presidential candidate goes about doing the job of getting elected for the presidency. And you know, I would have thought a moral obligation, at least after he did that, would have been to come forward with an alternative to the presidential funding system that at least got us back to where we were before 2008. But he didn't even do that. And so this is the great challenge we have in the context of thinking about the presidency.
Don't you worry that given the cynicism of figures like Obama, you're very easily bled dry? They can do what the Clintons have done, what Obama has done in 2 election cycles, which is, and especially 2008, make the kinds of promises and commitments that he knows most Americans want. And in a way, there's no way to hold a politician like that accountable. I mean, for you to raise $1 or $2 million is, Herculean. I mean, it's amazing and it's fantastic, but it's nothing to these figures.
Well, if our super PAC works, we will have raised $12 million in 2014, and we're going to raise, the numbers are anywhere, our calculations are anywhere from $300 million to $1 billion that it'll take to win in 2016. So those are not insignificant numbers. But you're right. I mean, the fundamental problem we have is that the political system for the presidency is, again, the mature view of what Clinton was doing, is against this kind of reform. Which is why, in my book, I sort of mapped out a different way to think about a candidate for the presidency. So I said, imagine a kind of regent president, or a kind of president as in bankruptcy judge president, who runs and says, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get elected. I'm going to hold Congress hostage until they pass this reform. And once they pass this reform, I'm going to resign and my vice president will become president. Could take a day, could take a week, could it take 2 years? I don't know how long it'll take, but this is the one thing I'm going to do. And you know that if I'm elected, I'm going to do it because, I would be a complete failure if I then said, no, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to do these other things. So it's credible, and it's also irresistible from Congress's standpoint, because if a person were elected who said that, then the people have spoken. The thing Obama could say is that, yeah, some people thought I was for campaign finance, some thought I was for climate change, some thought I was for labor rights. Everybody thought that they knew who Obama was, but he was everybody. But here it is, I'm just this. So that it becomes the kind of transformative presidency that is self-limiting, because it's like, this is all I'm going to do. And the candidate then could fight the war in a way that no normal president could, because he's not caring about re-election. He's not caring about keeping the Democratic Party or the Republican Party happy. All he or she is concerned about is doing the thing that brings about the kind of reform. Now, if you think about the way that strategy plays out, Imagine somebody took the lead doing that on one side, the Democratic Party or Republican Party. Quickly, if this became popular, it would have to be matched on the other side. So if the Democrat took the lead and said, this is how I'm going to run, then Republicans are like, oh my God, we need a reform candidate too. So then quickly the election would become about the vice presidential candidates. Yeah, I'm going to have so-and-so as my vice presidential candidate. And then you'd be thinking about, well, what's the long term going to look like and what's the short term going to be? And plausibly, if it gets enough support, they just want to get this done as quickly as they possibly can. So first day on office, there it is, the bill you sign. You don't even move into the White House. Now this is the kind of strategy I think that begins to break the paralysis of the current way in which normal presidencies work. But of course, it requires a certain kind of figure, a certain kind of candidate to be able to credibly take this on.
I mean, the question really is, where does power lie? Does power lie with the president? Does power lie with an elected member of Congress? Ultimately, do they have power, political power? Or is it, ExxonMobil and Raytheon and Goldman Sachs? And where does power lie? I mean, the Occupy movement would argue that power is not in Washington. Power is on Wall Street.
Yeah, and the question is, how does Wall Street exercise that power? So one of the most dramatic pictures of the way it exercises its power is if you just map the breakdown of Wall Street contributions to Democrats and Republicans. So in 2006, it's roughly equal. 2008, it's slightly more for Republicans. 2010, it's a little bit more for Republicans. 2012, it's overwhelmingly for Republicans. So after 2012, Democrats start talking about deregulating derivatives, right? It's like Wall Street bait, to bring Wall Street back, because the party realizes it cannot survive if Wall Street is against it. And that's because Wall Street, or finance, insurance, and real estate, is the largest block of contributions to campaigns in Congress. So the mechanism of power is through the funding of campaigns. Okay, well, I still think there are end runs around that. So again, if you had this kind of president who runs a campaign about reform and elects a bunch of people with him or her also focused on reform, then that person doesn't depend on Wall Street. That person's independent of Wall Street. And if you have a Congress that's been kind of, elected in the context of this type of campaign, it's going to be kind of hard for them to back down from it, or at least many of them to back down from it, because there's this expectation that's been created. Here's the person we elected. This is what the election was about. You better do it. Or 2 years later, when he or she is still in the White House waiting for that bill to come, there's going to be a pretty bloody midterm election about this type of.
But do you envision this coming through the two-party system or outside of it?
Unfortunately, the way our party system is structured, I think this has to be through the two-party system. Now, it's got to be a kind of independent person through the two parties, not a kind of, ordinary politician wannabe who works his or her way up through the system, but somebody who's credible outside the system. And so, people are talking about how that candidate gets developed and who that could be, but that might be, when I did the second version of my book, in the afterward, I basically said this might be the only way to imagine the presidency playing a central role.
But then you'd have to change the internal rules of the parties themselves.
Why?
Because after the McGovern election, where the grassroots won, the Democratic leadership rewrote the rules to make sure that would never happen again. And you saw, let's go back to the 2008 primaries, where you had Dennis Kucinich physically not allowed into the debates, which were sponsored by corporations. The first debate was sponsored by pharmaceutical and insurance industries.
Right, and then dramatically you saw that, I think, in the Republican primary. In the Republican primary of 2012, there was arguably the most qualified candidate, Buddy Roemer, who was a governor and a 4-term congressman and a person who had started a bank and made a successful community bank in Louisiana. was not permitted to be in any debate.
Yeah.
And why? Well, because he had tied himself to a pledge that he would take no more than $100 from anybody, take no PAC money, $100 from anybody. And they said, well, you can't win, buddy. And he said, well, look, I can't win if you don't let me in the debate. So they said, okay, you've got to get 1% national recognition. So when he got that, then they said 5% national recognition. And when he got that, then they said, you have to have raised $500,000 in the prior 6 weeks. And he said, my whole campaign is about the money. You can't force me to give out the central premise of my campaign to be allowed in the debate. This is just the way it is.
And they did the same thing to Kucinich. Remember, you had to be in the top 5. By the time New Hampshire rolled around, under their imposed rules, he had qualified, and they just, I can't remember why, they didn't let him in the debate hall. He literally was standing outside in the snow. So, I mean, working within those two-party systems requires confronting those structures even to get heard.
Yeah, that's right. Although, I think that there's a way in which you are prominent enough that you can't be excluded. Ross Perot couldn't be excluded in 92, right? Just couldn't be excluded. There was a debate that had all three. And I think, Dennis Kucinich, as much as one loves him for what he stands for, didn't achieve the national support necessary to make it impossible to exclude him from the debate. So
am I not correct in saying that after the Ross Perot phenomena, the Republican Party changed the rules so there would never be another Ross Perot? I think that's right.
They changed the rules, and they certainly changed the rules in the debate. But we've not yet had a case where you've got somebody who's developed enough of an independent political, 10 or 15% or 20% support, who's been excluded in the context of the debate. The debate rules explicitly say if you achieve this level at a certain point, then you will be included in the debate. So no doubt the bar is much higher. And so you got to aim for that bar. Now, whether they continue to move the bar higher and higher.
Well, that's what they did. That's what they do, isn't it?
Well, we'll see. I mean, that's the question.
I mean, they just rewrite the rule. They rewrote the rules every week. The whole goal was to keep those voices out. And we can go back to Nader. I mean, the person or the party that destroyed Ralph Nader was the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
They were terrified. He held a rally in Madison Square Garden. He didn't have the money to rent the hall. He said everyone has to pay $5, and he filled it. And at that point, the Democrats set out and did destroy him. So it's not just the structure of campaign finance. It's not just a corrupt political system, but it is essentially parties that have atrophied in a sense that they have locked out any kind of genuine grassroots candidates. Nobody rises from the base.
No, that's right, through the party.
They are anointed by the moneyed and political elite, which is how we have been reduced to this monstrosity of, a few ruling families. We may very well have an election between Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton. It's like the end of Rome. And so I guess, the question is, how far gone is the system? And I think you probably believe that it's still transformable internally.
I don't have to believe that to believe that this is what I should do. I could believe that it's not transformable. But in the face of it being non-transformable, you still have to act openly and honestly to transform it. And if there are enough people beaten down doing exactly that, that's the conditions for making it so the structure that makes it the way it is weaken. Now, so maybe not this generation, the next, but what else do we do, right?
Well, what about the German political system, where you have a party that kind of militantly represents labor? It never polls more than 5%, as far as I know, but it is a factor that has to be taken into consideration. Of course, it's a parliamentary system, but it doesn't sound from what you're saying that this money is going to go to third-party candidates. It is going to be funneled into traditional parties, and third-party candidates. I mean, Nader would certainly argue that that is the only way to build pressure, especially on the Democratic Party, is to separate from the party and build independent political movements.
Yeah, and I would agree with that after we find a way to neutralize the money. I mean, the difference between Germany and the United States, you pointed to it. That's a proportional parliamentary system. So having 5% is to have a lot, because then that's the difference between winning and losing for the majority parties. But in the United States, having 5% is nothing, because we've allowed this two-party system to lock us down into this constant battle between parties which on most important issues, the money issues, there's no difference between them. And this is what's so interesting about the polarization debate. America's not polarized, it's inconsistently polarized. So the parties, there's one party on money, think of Clinton's race to deregulate Wall Street. But then the social issues, they're radically opposed to each other. But that's a nice strategy for flushing money out of that base, because you scare them because they're pro-abortion or they're pro-gay rights, while at the same time sitting down with the Wall Street bankers and saying basically the same thing.
Right. Well, both parties have adopted a fear-based ideology, and they whip up the fear. Homosexuals will be teaching your children in kindergartens, kind of stuff. And yet you're right. They're all feeding from the same trough. And at that point, to use Sheldon Wolin's term, we've walked away from anything that can honestly be called a democracy. At that point, we live in what he calls inverted totalitarianism. We live in a corporate totalitarian system, and the way that you affect reform and change within a totalitarian structure is very different from the way you affect change within a liberal capitalist democracy.
Maybe, but I think the historical difference here is the enormous capacity for violence, organized violence. It's one thing to resist in a direct, powerful way in a world where there are muskets and redcoats. But you saw firsthand in the Occupy movement what happens when it's spun around so that they could invoke the right to deploy literally jackbooted troops in to suppress the uprisings and to restore peace. My view is it's a scary time. And it might be that historically you look back and you say, yeah, what happened is people organized and they rose up and overthrew the government. I'm not sure we have the technical capacity to rise up against that amount of force, legitimized force right now.
I covered the revolutions in Eastern Europe, and the only way you do it, as you saw with we're now the 20th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, when Beijing sent in troops, people surrounded the convoys for 4 days, brought them food and water, invited them into their homes, and paralyzed that military structure. And this is what happened in Czechoslovakia. It's what happened in East Germany.
But remember, let's stop with Tiananmen Square, because I was in China literally. My plane was supposed to land on June 3rd.
Wow.
And I was diverted, and I came in 2 weeks later. Within 2 weeks, it was almost impossible to find anybody in China who would say anything good about the youth movement that had. So yeah, there's a guy standing in front of a tank in an effort to sort of slow them down, but they won, right? And they won largely because of this overwhelming force that they could deploy, and people realized they had this force. Now, Eastern Europe is a different story, right? Because Eastern Europe was filled with these Potemkin village-like forces. And once people saw this all collapsing, it was easy to imagine escaping it, and people did. The reality of the United States right now is not weakness in the security dimension. This is the one thing we do well. Like, we have guns and tanks and bazookas and drones. We've got everything they need. And if we ever get this fight framed in we've got to keep the peace, dimension, yeah, it's not just that we lose, we die.
Well, that's why it has to remain nonviolent. But I covered the Stasi state, which was the most sophisticated security and surveillance state until ours. And they brought it down when Erich Honecker tried to send down an elite paratroop division to Leipzig to fire on the demonstrators, and they refused. Honecker lasted another week. And I think revolutions, despite the mythology, are usually nonviolent. And what broke the Tsar was the Cossacks going to Petrograd, refusing to fire on the right, and indeed fraternizing with the crowd, and the Tsar abdicates.
Yeah, but my point is not whether they are nonviolent or not. My point is whether they can be framed as violent when they are not.
Well, that's what they always seek
They always seek to do, right. And right. So I want to structure this in a way that makes it almost impossible to characterize it. So I want to do it in the old, high school civics-like way.
Right.
Like we're talking about organizing people to vote, and we're talking about turning them out to force candidates to answer questions. And we're talking about, now, that might not work. It might need another strategy, might be out there, but I want to try all these strategies, and I want to play the side that you cannot begin to say that I'm a revolutionary, right? I'm not. I'm ordinary, working within the system to bring the system.
I guess that's the difference between the two of us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's why we need both. We need both of these.
And it doesn't really matter at this point if, sitting around wondering whether it's going to work or not work, because if you don't do anything, you know it isn't going to work.
Right.
So everything should, pressure from every point should be pushed with a clear understanding of what we're up against. How would you handle a candidate? Let's take the candidate who beat Cantor in the primary. So he did rail against Wall Street, but it is a kind of proto-fascist Tea Party populism, and it's frightening. And you can see it within Ron Paul, where on issues of civil liberties and empire, he's really good. There are very problematic questions about issues of race. The welfare state. What happens when you get these far right-wing populists who on this issue are good?
Well, I think what happens is we ideally bring them together with progressives who want to change the system too. We change the system, and then we go into a fight about what our democracy stands for. What's interesting in Arizona, which is one of the three publicly funded election states at the state level, is that many of the mainstream Republicans in Arizona now hate public funding because they say, look what public funding did in Arizona. You got all these crazy right-wingers who took over politics in Arizona. And my response is, well, that's Arizona. That's the people. But I don't actually think the people in the nation, pull to that extreme. I mean, there are people at that extreme, fine. But that's what democracy is about. It's about saying, okay, we got people at this extreme, people at that extreme. We got to find a way to build a coalition to govern that's not going to be at those extremes. So I read what Brat said. What I was impressed about with Brat is that number 2 on his list of issues was, quote, crony capitalism.
Right.
And the way in which these people have sold out to the money interests. Fine, I take that. I want that. That's exactly the kind of rhetoric I want. And then I'm going to say we're going to bracket the immigration stuff. We're not going to have that conversation. I'm not having that conversation with you. I'm going to have the conversation with you where we can find a common ground to bring about a change so that we're not fighting the money interest. Now, people, especially some progressives, when I talk about creating vouchers so people can put their money together, they say, oh my gosh, we're going to have the people doing all sorts of crazy special interest legislation to benefit the people. And I'm like, that's a tiny problem, in my view, compared to the special interest that we're getting on behalf of the funders of campaigns right now. So I don't support the idea of elite governing America. I'm a populist in this sense. I support the idea of the people, recognizing I'm not going to agree with what the people do in a whole bunch of cases, but I don't know the alternative that I, in the long term, would turn to other than that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you've seen the headlines. Supreme Court strikes down limits on federal campaign donations. Supremes, money is speech. High Court loosens reins on big campaign donors. But what does this McCutcheon case ruling even mean for everyday citizens? And how has this new Supreme Court ruling changed the current campaign finance system?
Now, somebody can donate $5,200 to a candidate in an election cycle, but they can only do that about 8 times before they hit a candidate maximum, an aggregate limit. Now, they could theoretically, I don't know how many people will do this, but I think they could theoretically donate $5,200 to every candidate. That probably would equal around $7.2 million in hard money contributions directly to candidates. That doesn't even account for the amount of money that they could contribute to PACs or parties or state parties. So when you start adding in all of that money, you reach a number that's in the millions for the amount that a person could legally donate to these hard money entities.
Sarah Briner is the research director at the nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics. Her organization essentially tracks campaign contributions from individuals, lobbyists, super PACs, and more, and makes all the information available for free at opensecrets.org. The McCutcheon decision will not only mean more money in politics, but Briner says that it will also make funds harder to track.
Joint fundraising committees, which can accept unlimited amounts of money and then give that money to things like state parties or candidates. So essentially what happens is a candidate sets up a candidate, usually a member of the leadership, sets up a joint fundraising committee, and a donor gives money to that joint fundraising committee, and then the committee gives that money to a state party, another candidate, another state party, the national party. In the past, that money was limited because the individual would have hit the campaign contributions limit. Now, that's not a concern. Within the Joint Fundraising Committee, the things like the parties and the candidates can give money to each other. So once you give money through the committee, it could end up back in the original candidate's hands. And I think Justice Breyer said that around $2.37 million could theoretically, this is all hypothetical, go from a donor to a candidate more or less directly. These joint fundraising committees are already difficult to keep track of because it's hard to see the original source of the money once it's allocated to all of the sort of subcomponents of the committee. So that makes it difficult to sort of see how much influence one person is having towards one candidate. And now that there could be more of them and that they can take more money, it's going to be just much more difficult to sort of keep track of one person's attempted influence.
But there are some who see this as a victory, like President of the Center for Competitive Politics, David Keating, whose brainchild super PACs came out on top in the Supreme Court's SpeechNow.org versus FEC case in 2010. Keating says this decision protects freedom of speech.
One of the interesting parts of the ruling today was the court said something to the effect that the last people we want regulating speech are the people in the government itself. I mean, they have a clear conflict of interest to try to twist the rules in their favor. And that's one of the things this biennial limit that was struck down today did. It's something that helped incumbents.
Do you equate then speech with money?
Well, speech doesn't equal money, but if you want to buy ads, print flyers, do mailings, you need money to do it. So imagine if Congress passed a law saying, well, anyone could run a national news network, but none of the news networks could take more than $25,000 in advertiser money, or no one could invest more than $25,000 in a national news network. You wouldn't be able to have much of a national news network, right? And the same is true. If people want to get together and organize on a cause, you know, whether it's gun control or abortion rights or, you know, taxes, you name it, we don't want Congress passing laws saying you can only give a certain amount to support a cause in the context of an election.
Critics of the McCutcheon Supreme Court decision have dubbed it Citizens United on steroids, alluding to the 2011 decision when the court ruled that corporations and unions can spend unlimited amounts of money on political tools like advertisements. But with all of these loosening of regulations, it begs the question, how will this affect democracy?
In effect, what you've just done is you've super empowered the 1%.
That's the real, I mean, now this is not an enormous surprise, and they had plenty of access already with money that was not given directly to political campaigns in that narrow sense.
But will the Supreme Court's decision tilt the scales one way or the other for either Democrats or Republicans? Though Democrats came out bashing the ruling, Briner says both parties are just as accepting and reliant on big donors.
The Republicans I know today have put up sort of positive language about the decision. I saw the director of the RNC praising the decision, and there's been a lot more dissent from Democrats, but when it comes down to it, you know, the Democrats and Republicans usually take in around the same amount of money. So, and they all are benefiting from these very wealthy individuals. So it's really more a question of rhetoric than it actually is, you know, one party rejecting big money. That hasn't happened, and I certainly don't see that happening in the future.
Roosevelt Institute senior fellow Thomas Ferguson agrees that in the 2012 presidential election, Democrats were on par with Republicans in terms of campaign cash. But based on his recent research, he says Republicans are gaining a slight lead.
I think it'll make it somewhat easier to give money inside Republican primaries to the candidates directly. I mean, people are still spending tons of money on the independent expenditures and those things. That's where the main battleground has been in these primaries, between like the Club for Growth versus the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or something like that. You want to think of that as Godzilla versus King Kong. That's still the main bout there, and I don't think that's going to be upended by this decision.
But what the data clearly does show is that the ones contributing to campaigns aren't your average Americans. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, about $6.3 billion went into the 2012 federal election cycle, and that's only the money that we can track. By law, if you contribute more than $200, you have to itemize the contribution. The number of Americans that actually contribute more than $200 is 1.2 million. That's less than 1% of the U.S. population. And those giving more than $2,500, they make up 0.08% of the U.S. population.
It's difficult to prove any kind of quid pro quo relationship, but certainly it is the case that people who can donate large sums of money are probably more likely to get meetings with members of Congress or more likely to get their phone calls answered. And certainly that speech is potentially just more loud than the speech of an individual voter.
Ferguson says that in order for speech to gain some equal footing, reining in excessive campaign donations won't be the solution. Instead, campaigns should be required to be funded by public financing.
Campaigns really cost money. You know, the classical approaches to democracy forgot that small point. And you got to find a way to finance elections. Now, basically, there are just two ways to do this. One is everybody pays a little public financing. Or you leave it to just a few people to pay the whole bill, in which case they control the system.
But now that money has been given an even louder bullhorn in the political arena, time will tell if a critical mass will raise their voices to protest as the campaign cash starts racking up ahead of this November's elections. For the Real News Network, Jessica Devereaux, Washington. Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux coming to you from Capitol Hill. This is day 3 of Democracy Spring. The protesters here, their message is simple: get money out of politics. They also want to see laws that address voter suppression laws. So we have some protesters behind me, as you can see, staging a sit-in. This is the 3rd day of sit-ins. The first day, there were more than 400 people arrested here. Yesterday, Tuesday, we had a group of elders be arrested here. And today, the theme is racial justice. So we have about 50 people or so right now. As you can see, the police are putting bands on their wrists, and eventually they will be escorting them to be processed. And what we've heard, if it is your first arrest, you will be getting a fine of about $50. It's essentially a ticket, and if you're arrested the second time, you will be staying overnight in prison. And third time around, they aren't quite sure what the consequences will be, but that is what we were told from protesters that the police had told them about what would potentially happen to them. So as I said before, this is Democracy Spring. There are 4 pieces of legislation that they're really focusing on. One of those pieces of legislation would be a constitutional amendment that would essentially limit the amount of campaign contributions that could go to a politician, and that would be a part of the Constitution. There are states that already have such laws on the books, but there is no federal law that limits the amount of contributions. And as you all know, if you've been following this issue, Citizens United, as well as the McCutcheon decision, has made it even more difficult for people to track who's giving to whom. So these voters, these citizens here today, they're saying that they're standing up and saying no more. They want more accountability. They want the corrupting influence of money out of politics. There's also the Voter Empowerment Act of 2015. That act specifically looks at getting back to the original Voting Rights Act's intention, which was to empower voters as opposed to suppress voters' rights. And they argue that voter ID laws, bans for those who have been convicted of crimes and have served their time, for them not being allowed to actually vote again. They're saying that those laws disenfranchise communities of color, and that's why specifically today it's about racial justice. There are also other laws that they are looking to get Congress to pass. But another part of this protest is they want the Senate to actually conduct a hearing and vote on the president's nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court Justice. Protesters here today are saying they're not taking a stand on President Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland, but they do say that the Senate has a constitutional duty to at least have an up or down vote on this process. So that's another one of the protesters' demands. They'd also like to modernize the electoral system with automatic voter registration, as well as making sure that it's easier with online registration and things of that nature for people to vote. They're also encouraging another piece of legislation that essentially would provide public campaign financing to match small donations. So essentially, if you're an everyday person and you make a contribution of $50, the government would match that $50. There's a piece of legislation now in the House. Congressman Van Hollen is the person who has come out with that bill. I spoke to the lead organizer yesterday, Kai Newkirk. He said that this was intentional, these 4 pieces of legislation that they're focused on, because they already have so much support, both from Republicans and Democrats. And they strongly talk about how this issue about reforming campaign finance is a bipartisan issue. There was a recent Pew Research Center poll that found 80% of Democrats and 70% of Republicans find that campaign finance reform is something that needs to happen, and they see that there is a corrupting influence of money in politics that needs to be addressed. So we are here, as I said, on Capitol Hill. As you can see behind me, folks are being lined up. They're going to be arrested. The Capitol Police, they're very much used to protests like this, and we really haven't seen confrontation between protesters and the police. If anything, it's been very, very orderly. And the media here, we would love to get even closer and get a chance to speak to some of these protesters, but we are actually sort of penned into this one area, but at least we can see what's going on here. So we're going to be continuing this coverage all week here at The Real News. We started on Monday, as I said before. It was unprecedented. More than 400 people arrested here at the Capitol. The police are saying that that's the largest number of arrests, not just in this century, but in history. So these protesters were telling me that they are so happy to be making history here and hope that their message will reach out to more people and inspire more people to join this movement that's being called Democracy Spring. We also have shots for you, hopefully you'll be able to see them, of the protesters who aren't participating in the sit-in. There, I would say, at least 100 to 150 folks that are here, and there's a line of police officers that are kind of keeping the two sets of protesters divided. There are those who participate in the sit-ins and those that are offering their support. Many of them were part of the early rally, and I believe there is someone that we have who would like to talk about why they're protesting here today. Let's hear what they have to say.
Say your name and go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Andy Kim. I'm with Democracy Spring, and if you look behind you here, these protesters are being arrested for quote-unquote actively protesting, and there are individuals over there who are doing the exact same thing. They're not singing, but they're allowed to be there. No one's arresting them, and that scenario, it's a little questionable. And to use a blanket term like actively protesting, that's a term that historically oppressive states have used. So we'll let the judgment stand there. I'm with Democracy Spring. I handle social media metrics for the team. What's going on today? So today's day 3 of Democracy Spring, our sit-in week. Today is dedicated to racial justice. So there's going to be an emphasis on Black Lives Matter, to the marginalized people, African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, anyone who is basically not part of the patriarchy is being represented here with an emphasis on them.
No, you're good. On the other side of the police line. Before I was reporting closer to where the sit-in is taking place. Now we're in the midst of the protesters. I'm joined now by Brian. Brian, thanks so much for being with us.
No problem.
So Brian, let's talk a little bit about the message of Democracy Spring. One of the tenets is that you guys want to make sure that voter suppression resides, and you're pushing for laws that would empower voters. That is what is on the press releases, at least. Can you talk a little bit about how voter suppression laws have affected everyday people and also communities of color?
All right, so that's the long and short of it is that especially after the Supreme Court started stripping out pieces of the Voters' Right Act, a lot of states went through and started putting in really horrible laws, mainly voter ID laws, and essentially if you looked at the demographics, it turns out that the majority of people affected by these voter ID laws are people of color, and so I guess the main point there was to try to make sure that poor people, people of color, and so forth don't have a fair say in the election process. And yeah, we're trying to protest that.
Why are you here? Why is it so meaningful for you to be here today?
Well, so I'm a big fan of getting money out of politics because the more money there is in politics, the more it tends that Congress ignores the will of the people. A perfect example of that is with the universal background checks. I believe that it polled at somewhere like 70 to 80% of people, and not just Democrats, not just Republicans, just American population, believe that universal background checks should be done. And the long and short of it is that because of powerful lobbies like the NRA, it couldn't get done. And
so we're talking about background checks for guns.
Guns, yes, sorry about that.
No worries.
Apologies. So.
Okay, so essentially, as you're saying, this issue affects every issue because money and politics are intertwined into any piece of legislation.
Exactly.
Okay. So is this your first day protesting?
It is my first day protesting here. I've protested with Black Lives Matter about a year or so back. So.
Okay. And for you, do you have, since you've been protesting for a year for Black Lives Matter, does this movement feel any different? Do you feel like there is a collaboration that is being made between folks who are concerned about campaign finance reform and issues of racial justice?
Well, yeah, especially today, since today is the racial justice march portion of the Democracy Spring speech. So there are a lot of Black Lives Matter people here. And so I wasn't here the other days. But right now, you hear people chanting and singing. And this is a lot what the Black Lives Matter protests were like. But I imagine most protests are kind of like this, though.
What would you say to people who might be on the fence about joining this movement?
Just come out and, you can stand at the back until you feel comfortable and then move forward.
Okay. All right, Brian, thanks so much.
No problem.
All right, so we have more folks to talk to. You know what? Let's walk. I think it would be kind of fun so you guys can get a sense of what it's like on this side of things. So as you can see, there are signs everywhere. Democracy Spring. That is the name of the movement. I noticed your tank top. Do you mind talking with us? We're at the Real News Network. Okay, great. What's your name?
My name is Adam Greenberg.
Adam, I'm Jessica. Nice to meet you. So Adam, can we talk about racial justice is the theme of today, and this larger campaign and this larger movement is about getting money out of politics. Where do these two issues intersect? Where do you see the connection?
So, of course, I'm only speaking from my experience with racial justice, which looks different from a lot of other folks here experience with racial justice. But for me, I see the intersection of money and politics and racial justice in any piece and place where there is law and policy that affects racial justice. So I see that in regards to legislation like the 3 Strikes law, like the welfare reform bill, like a lot of the things that have actually been coming up in this election cycle. But anywhere where policy and laws affect human beings who are impacted by these racial justice issues. That's influenced by money in politics, because you have big money interests, notably the prison lobby, even the pharmaceutical lobby, who drive up prices of goods and medicine so that people, disproportionately poor people, low-income communities and communities of color, can't access the resources that they need to survive and thrive.
Can I ask you, where are you from? Talk about why you decided to get involved with this movement.
I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, which is actually one of the most segregated cities in the country. I believe it is number 3, to our great shame. And it is, and yeah, these racial justice issues show up in very big ways in our city and, of course, around the country. And money in politics, of course, is something that affects everything that has any law or policy relating to it in any way, shape, or form. I got involved in Democracy Spring primarily through a lens of racial justice and climate justice. And I'm a young person. I'm very concerned about climate change. I think about whether or not I'll be able to have children. And of course, I've worked on the international policy side in the United Nations climate negotiations. And that was sort of one place where I had an awakening and realized this process is a reflection of political will. Our political system is broken. The processes that are supposed to work, which includes the United Nations, it includes our government. The processes that are supposed to work rely on people having a voice and a say in the decisions that affect them. And that cannot happen when big money interests overrule and override the interests of the community. When politicians are bought and paid for, they have to be beholden to those interests.
Right. I mean, there's so much energy here today. I want to talk about what the long-term strategy looks like. Do you feel like, how do you turn this moment into like a real movement?
Sure. Well, I think as we've seen in every social movement, and we stand on the shoulders of giants, and here on Racial Justice Day we're thinking about a lot of those movements a lot, but I think one of the main steps we need to do is move the pillars of support away from systems that institutionalize injustice. So, I mean, a big thing is, you know, when we see in these social movements, what happens is people start talking about them, people start speaking out against them. We see, you know, in any movement, from civil rights movements to the gay rights movement, you had celebrities speaking out, you had churches speaking out, you had institutions, you had businesses making statements, moved the pillars of support away, and it forced all the politicians to either move along with those pillars of support or no longer be relevant in the conversation. So I think we're doing that here. I mean, we have a lot of huge endorsements from organizations, coalitions, celebrities, faith groups, churches, etc. And a lot of politicians too. And in fact, a lot of the politicians in this campaign trail are talking about it, at least nominally supporting, you know, overturning Citizens United and all these policies. So we're moving the conversation. Now we need to show that our power that we hold can be greater than the power that is held by these big money interests. And the first step is to get some of these big money interests out of politics.
All right, Adam, thank you so much for talking with us. All right. Okay, guys, you heard it. This is what it's all about, getting money out of politics. I want to take you around so you can see more of the crowd over there. And as you can see, they are right in front of the Capitol building, holding up signs. Democracy Spring. As we're here in the crowd on the other side of things, I hope you should be able to see those folks who are performing a sit-in. They are getting arrested. As you can see, they're putting bands around their wrists. And from what I was told by the protesters, your first arrest, you get a $50 fine. Your second arrest, a night in prison. I don't know after that. I'll have to do more research on that issue. But that is what we are being told, that these folks, if it's their first arrest, they'll be getting a $50 fine. All right. All right, so this is Jessica Devereaux here on Capitol Hill, third day of Democracy Spring. It's going strong. I mean, I see at least a couple of hundred people here. As I said, more than about 50 people being arrested today. First day, more than 400 people were arrested. It was unprecedented. We're going to be bringing you coverage of this event all week. We have a Labor Day, we have a Students' Day, we have a Climate Justice Day, all on the horizon. But thank you so much for watching The Real News. I'm Jessica Devereaux coming to you from Capitol Hill.